I pulled into my dad's driveway a little after 5 in the evening, the winter sky already turning that deep blue that always makes Christmas. Lights look a little magical and a little sad at the same time. The house sat in a quiet neighborhood just outside Nashville. One of those older brick places with a big front window and a porch that had seen decades of birthdays and holidays. Warm yellow light spilled out onto the lawn from the living room, and from the street I could already hear the rise and fall of familiar voices. My name is Madeline Carter, but everyone calls me Maddie. That Christmas, I was 32 years old, and I had driven down from my small apartment in the city, telling myself it would be fine this year, that I was a grown woman and I could handle one family dinner. Maybe you know that pep talk. You sit in the car a minute longer, fingers on the steering wheel, heart doing that little nervous stutter. And before I take you inside with me, let me ask you something. What are you doing while you listen to this story? I always love hearing that in the comments. For me, on the night everything finally broke open, I was standing in my dad's living room in the suburbs of Nashville, pretending I was not freezing on the inside while everyone else was warm. I stepped out into the cold and locked the car, my boots crunching on the thin frost that had settled over the grass. From inside, someone laughed loudly. That easy, carefree laugh that comes from people who know they are the center of attention. My shoulders tightened on instinct. I took a breath, climbed the steps, and let myself in without knocking, because even if it had not felt like it in a very long time, the smell hit me first. Ham baking in the oven, sweet potatoes, cinnamon, cheap cologne, and under all of it, the faint, sour hint of beer. The living room was packed. My dad, Harold, 67 and moving slower these days, but still trying to play the charming host, was right in the middle of it all, with a red sweater that was a size too tight and a grin that did not quite reach his eyes. People were clapping him on the back. His gray hair was combed for once. He looked like the picture of a proud Southern dad at Christmas. Rebecca was standing near him, laughing with 2 of our cousins. At 41, she looked like a woman out of a holiday commercial. Her hair was done, her makeup was perfect, and she held a glass of wine like she had been born with it in her hand. Every time she spoke, heads tilted toward her. The golden daughter, the one who had always done everything right in their eyes, even when she did not. Dylan saw me first, my younger brother by a few years, 37, and still carrying himself like the smart aleck teenager who never grew up. He lounged on the arm of the couch with a beer in his hand, watching the room the way a cat watches a bird feeder. When he spotted me by the doorway, his mouth curled in that half-smile that was not quite friendly and not quite a sneer. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear even without me quoting the exact words. The room turned, just a little. Some people waved. Rebecca lifted her glass at me and smiled the way you smile at a distant neighbor. My dad glanced over, eyes sliding across me the way you check if the mail has arrived, and then he turned back to whatever story he was telling. I hung up my coat on the old wooden hook in the hallway and stepped into the living room, doing what I always did, looking for a corner where I could exist without being in the way. There was a folding chair by the window, half hidden behind the tree. I made my way there, past the coffee table with the deviled eggs and cheese ball, past a cluster of kids sitting on the floor with new toys, past my aunt, who gave me a quick side hug and then went right back to asking Rebecca about her latest promotion at the school district. I sat down, smoothed my jeans, and folded my hands in my lap, so no one would see they were shaking just a little. I watched my dad. He looked happy, relaxed in a way I rarely saw when it was just him and me on the phone, his voice short and flat as he asked if the money had gone through this month. Tonight he was all easy swagger, clinking bottles, patting shoulders, giving mini speeches about family and blessings. 4 years ago, I told myself quietly. 4 years of sending him $2,200 every month. 4 years of saying, I can skip the trip. I can buy the cheaper groceries. I can live in a place with thin walls and no parking, because my dad's mortgage had to be paid. Over $105,600 by that Christmas. I ran the number in my head, the way some people count sheep when they cannot sleep. It has become a rhythm in my life. Someone turned the music down and my dad raised his phone. He climbed up on the slight ledge by the fireplace so everyone could see him. better. And the room quieted. He announced that he wanted to record a little Christmas greeting, something cute for the family group chat. Of course, everyone cheered. Rebecca moved closer to him, tilting her face toward the camera, already finding her best angle. Dylan laughed and pushed a cousin into the frame. My dad held the phone up, arm extended. I could not see the screen from where I sat by the window, only the way his face changed when he looked into the camera. It became broader, a little more fake, but still charming enough to work on people who did not know him the way I did. He started talking, putting on that smooth Nashville drawl he used when he wanted something. People laughed at the right moments. He joked about the food, the weather, the Titans losing again. The phone moved a little, showing flashes of the table set in the dining room, the big ham in the middle, the plates waiting, the candles someone had carefully arranged. I was half listening, half somewhere else, floating in that numb space I had learned to use as armor after so many holidays where I felt invisible. My own phone buzzed in my pocket. Absent-mindedly, I pulled it out and glanced down, expecting some random notification or a spam email. It was a new message from my dad. For a second, I frowned. He was right there, within 10 yards of me, recording. Maybe he had sent the finished video to everyone and I was just one more name on the list. I swiped to open it. The sound that spilled out of my phone was slightly tinny, a second behind the real-time noise in the room, like an echo from another dimension. The camera angle in the video was different. It was not the cheerful wide shot of everyone waving. It was closer. My dad was at the head of the table, leaning back in his chair with a beer in his hand, his sweater riding up a little over his stomach. The image shook a bit, like he had set the phone down against a salt shaker. Behind him, I could see plates, serving dishes, people moving in and out of frame, laughing. His voice, though, was completely clear. He was not talking the way he had just talked to the group. This was his real voice, the one that dropped into something sharper when he thought no one was paying attention who mattered. He said that his oldest girl was so good with money. Everyone around the table murmured and chuckled. He added that it was convenient to have someone like me, someone who would send money without asking questions, someone who would break her back to keep a roof over his head and never expect anything in return. Then he used the phrase that sliced through me like ice water. He called me their cash cow. He laughed about it. He said I was too dumb to ever figure out what they were really doing with my money. The laughter that followed that line in the video was louder than anything I could hear in the actual room. It filled my little spot by the window, crawled inside my ears, settled under my skin. I watched Rebecca in the frame, sitting to his right, tilting her head back and laughing like he had told the funniest joke of then night. She said that he should send that video to her so she could remember to remind me to pay on time, because if I ever found out the truth, it would be a real headache. Dylan leaned forward into the shot, grinning that same grin I had just seen when I walked in. He said that I thought I was some kind of savior, some kind of hero for helping, and that it was hilarious. He mimed someone throwing money in the air, and the people closest to him slapped the table and laughed even harder. I could feel my pulse pounding in my throat. The room around me in real time kept moving. People chatting, kids squealing, someone turning up the music a notch. On my screen, my dad reached for the phone, his face filling the frame. He smirked a little toward the camera and said that he was going to send this to Becky so she would remember not to go blabbing in front of Maddie, because some things were family business, and the cash cow did not need to hear the details. In the living room, a cousin bumped into my chair and apologized, without really looking at me. My phone felt heavy in my hand. I watched that last line again, his mouth forming the words that I had always suspected he thought but had never heard out loud. Cash cow. Too dumb. Does not need to hear the details. No one at that table, in the video or in the actual room, seemed to realize that the message had gone to the wrong person. They were still laughing, still relaxed, still acting like I was exactly where I had always been, tucked safely inside the role they had given me. The responsible one, the helper, the one who showed up and took care of things and never made a fuss. My blood went cold. It was a strange feeling, like everything inside me froze at once, while the rest of the world kept spinning. The din of conversation around me turned muffled, as if I were underwater. I stared at my dad on the screen, at my siblings smiling around him, and something in me quietly snapped. I stood up from the folding chair, my knees a little shaky, and slipped my phone into my pocket. From across the room, I heard my dad call out something about getting everyone to the table, about saying grace, about family being the greatest gift. Maybe he believed it, in his own twisted way. Maybe he did not. I just knew that the girl who walked into that house at 5 in the evening was not the same woman who was now turning toward the hallway, pulse roaring in her ears. That Christmas night in Nashville, I finally understood my place in that family. And I knew, as clearly as I knew my own name, that nothing about this would stay buried for long. If you have ever sat through a holiday pretending you did not hear the sharp edges under the laughter, if you have ever been treated like you were useful but not truly seen, you probably already know why I could not keep quiet after that. I stayed in the dim hallway, pulse pounding in my ears, the warmth from the dining room drifting toward me like it belonged to someone else's life. The laughter, the clinking silverware, the soft shuffle of chairs, all of it felt muffled, distant, like I was watching it through thick glass. My mind kept looping the video, my dad's voice, Rebecca's laugh, Dylan's smirk, the words cash cow, slicing through everything I thought I knew. The longer I stood there, the deeper the old memories pulled me down. Growing up in Nashville was a strange kind of loneliness. Our old house in Hendersonville had felt safe once, especially whenever Mom was around. She had this way of softening the world just by being in it. She smelled like lavender lotion and cinnamon rolls, and I still swear you could feel her warmth in a room 10 minutes after she walked out. When she got sick in late 2011, everything cracked. She died the week after Christmas in 2012. That was the year winter felt like it settled inside me. Dad changed overnight. He was still physically there, still working long shifts at the tire plant, still sitting at the same table for dinner. But emotionally, he went cold, detached. He barked orders instead of talking. He made decisions instead of asking. He clung to control like it was the only thing holding him together. Rebecca, she slid right into the empty spot Mom left behind. Dad treated her like she was the new center of the family. She got the first car, the extra money for school, the special attention. Dylan got excuses, second chances, and soft landings, no matter how many times he screwed up. And me? Well, I became useful. The housework fell to me. Groceries, homework help, laundry, making sure the bills got mailed when Dad forgot, holding my breath when he snapped, swallowing my hurt when Rebecca made fun of me for being too serious or too responsible. I learned early that being needed didn't mean being loved. One memory in particular cut through the rest. Senior year, I came home with the letter offering my full scholarship. I could barely contain myself. I handed it to Dad with shaking hands. He read it, nodded, and said something like, "Well, that is good. At least you will not be a burden." 2 days later, when Rebecca passed her driving test, he threw a backyard barbecue and gave her that dusty Chevy from the driveway, like it was gold. That was the moment I started believing my worth was tied only to what I could provide. And I carried that belief straight into adulthood. That is why, in 2019, when Dad called crying, I didn't even hesitate. I can still hear that phone call as clearly as the video I received tonight. He said he was behind on the mortgage, that the bank was threatening foreclosure. He said he was scared. Scared. I had never heard my dad use that word before. He told me Rebecca was pregnant again, and Dylan was drowning in credit card debt, and that he had no one else to turn to. I remember feeling something bloom in my chest. Not pride, not joy, but this tiny, fragile hope. Maybe I finally mattered. Maybe he finally needed me. I asked how much it was. He said $2,200 a month. My breath had caught in my throat, but I said I would do it. He seemed surprised, then relieved. He thanked me in this soft voice I had not heard since before Mom died. I lived thin after that, ate cheap, drove an old car that rattled every time I hit a pothole. I skipped vacations, skipped nights out, skipped upgrading anything in my life. Every first of the month, that transfer went through like clockwork. Tonight, Listening to him drink and laugh and brag about how dumb I was, I felt every sacrifice like a bruise. I turned my head toward the dining room when I heard footsteps. I stepped a little deeper into the shadows by the hallway window, not ready for anyone to see the storm brewing on my face. David walked past, phone in hand, still grinning. I watched the back of his sweater disappear into the kitchen and felt my stomach twist. The version of him in the video had already replaced the version standing in the next room. I could not separate them anymore. Rebecca's voice drifted toward me again. Low, soft, scheming. She was standing with Marlene near the dining archway. The two of them were fixing the napkins, pretending to help, but really just talking. Rebecca said she could not wait for the next 6 months to pass. She said Dad had already calculated that the mortgage would be completely paid off by summer. She said he planned to keep me paying even after the house was free and clear. Then she laughed and said if Maddie keeps thinking she is helping, we can finally redo the kitchen. Maybe even fix that ugly deck. My breath caught. My fingers curled against the wall. 6 months. They were 6 months away from owning the house outright, which meant they had known for a while, and no one planned to tell me. Not even after I had sent more than $105,600 without a single late payment. I felt something in me settle. Not calm, not acceptance, clarity. I eased back farther into the hallway as Rebecca and Marlene moved toward the dining room. Their voices faded, but the words did not. It amazed me, in a horrifying way, how easily people will use the person who loves the hardest. Every laugh in that video, every whisper near the dining archway, cut through years of denial. I had wanted so desperately to believe my dad cared. I had wanted to believe I mattered, but I mattered only in the way a bank account matters. As I stood there, the smell of ham and cinnamon rolls drifting past me, I thought about all those years I spent picking up pieces after Mom died, all those nights I stayed home instead of going out because Dad said he needed help. All the times I put myself last so someone in my family would finally look at me with something other than indifference. The truth hit me all at once. They had never seen me. Not really. They had only seen what they could take. I pressed a hand against my stomach, steadying myself. I was not the girl who had walked through that front door 2 hours earlier. The delusion had cracked. The spell had broken. There was no going back. Behind me, someone called my name. I turned slightly, but whoever it was had already moved on, too wrapped up in the festivities to notice I was missing. I could hear Dad telling everyone to take their seats, could hear the scrape of chairs on the floor, could hear the same laughter that had wounded me in the video, but my heartbeat was louder. I stepped back down the hallway, toward the guest bathroom, pretending I needed a moment. In reality, I just needed space to breathe, to let the truth settle, to feel the full weight of what I had finally uncovered. As I reached for the doorknob, the sound of Rebecca's laughter carried down the hall again, bright and sweet as honey on the outside and rotten underneath. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This Christmas dinner was the last time they would ever laugh at my expense. Something inside me had shifted, slow and unstoppable, and they had no idea what was coming. I stayed in that hallway just long enough to feel my heart beat slow from a hard thud to a tight ache. Then I straightened my shoulders, walked back to the front of the house, grabbed my coat from the hook, and slipped out the door without saying a word to anyone. Outside, the air in that Nashville suburb hit my face cold and clean. The sounds from inside the house were muffled now, wrapped in brick and glass and insulation. From the yard, the laughter sounded almost pretty. I knew better. I stood on the porch for a moment, fingers tight around my coat, staring at the Christmas lights my dad had strung along the gutters, white icicle strands that flickered gently in the cold. It should have been comforting. It just felt fake. I walked to my car on legs that did not quite feel like my own. The frost on the windshield had already started to creep in at the edges. I got in, shut the door, and the silence inside the car was so heavy it pressed against my ears. My phone was still in my hand. The screen lit my face with that harsh bluish glow when I tapped it. There it was. The video. Waiting. I could have deleted it, pretended I had never seen it. I went back inside, took my usual chair at the far end of the table, bowed my head for grace, and swallowed ham and resentment in equal measure. Instead, I hit play. Hearing it outside the house made it worse somehow. Harold's voice filled the car. The laughter echoed off the windows. Rebecca's bright little giggle. Dylan's lazy drawl. Cash cow. Too dumb. Does not need to know. I watched the whole thing through once. Then I watched it again. By the third time, my hands were not shaking anymore. They were steady. I did not trust myself to drive all the way back into the city that late, not in the state I was in. So I opened the booking app and pulled up the little guest house I had rented for the trip. It was 10 minutes from my dad's place, a simple one-bedroom behind an older couple's home. I had booked it instead of sleeping in my childhood bedroom because I had told myself I needed my own space. I did not realize how true that was until now. The drive there felt both instant and endless. I barely remember the turn, just the red and green glow of other people's Christmas decorations passing through the windshield. Nashville has this way of looking like a postcard in winter, all soft lights and dark trees. That night, it felt like a backdrop for someone else's story. When I pulled into the gravel driveway behind the guest house, my hands finally started to tingle. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving a fine tremor under my skin. I let myself inside, closed the door, and leaned my back against it for a long moment. The place smelled like lemon cleaner and old wood. There was a little artificial tree in the corner, lights already plugged in and glowing. The owner had left a plate of sugar cookies on the counter with a handwritten note. Merry Christmas. I dropped my keys on the table and sank onto the edge of the bed, the mattress creaking softly. For a minute, I just stared at my hands in my lap, watching my fingers flex and curl. Then I picked up my phone again. If there is one thing working in logistics has taught me, it is this. When something feels off, you verify. You get the numbers. You get your facts straight. First, I opened the family group chat. The usual clutter of messages filled the screen. Photos of kids, recipes, memes that had been shared 10 times. The newest message was at the top. It was that video from my dad. I could see that it had been sent to everyone, not just to me. Right under it was a text from Dylan. It was meant to be private. I could tell from the tone. But he had sent it to the whole group. His words jumped out at me. He said that everybody should try not to say too much in front of Maddie tonight. He said if I started asking questions, it would be a real problem. Then he added that it was best to just keep me happy and quiet until everything was finished. No one had responded yet, probably because they had not noticed the message, or because they were all in the same room. But there it was, out in the open, proof that this was not some offhand joke. They were coordinating. A cold calm settled over me. I backed out of the chat and opened my banking app. I had never really looked at the total before. I had watched each transfer go out, month after month, but I had not added them up in my head. Part of me had not wanted to know. I scrolled through the list. 4 years. Every first of the month. $2,200. I did the math slowly, forcing myself to see the number instead of letting my mind slide away from it. 4 years of payments. 12 months each year. That was 48 payments. At $2,200 each, that came to $105,600. I stared at the total until the numbers almost blurred. I thought about the extra shifts I had picked up. The weekends were spent answering emails for my job instead of going out. The vacations I had canceled. The chipped plates in my own kitchen. The way my heart had lifted every time my dad sent a short text saying the money really helped. All of that, and he had called me a cash cow. I set the phone down for a second and pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes until I saw little sparks of light. My head felt too full, like there was no room for another thought. But one thought pushed its way through anyway. If he was 6 months away from paying off the house, how much did he actually owe when he had called me the first time? I picked the phone up again and scrolled through my emails until I found the old thread from 2019. When he had first asked for help. He had sent me a photo of his mortgage statement back then. I zoomed in on it now. The original principal, the years left, the interest. I did some rough math in my head. It was possible that my payments, plus his Social Security and any odd jobs he had done, had brought the balance down that far. But something still felt wrong. There was only one way to know for sure. My fingers felt strangely steady as I searched for the customer service number for his mortgage lender. I found it in the old statement and dialed. It rang for a while, then a recorded voice picked up and routed me through a series of menus. I entered his loan number from the photo. When a human finally answered, a woman with a tired yet polite voice, I introduced myself as his daughter. I told her I had been helping with payments and wanted to confirm the remaining term. She hesitated, then asked me to verify a few details. I gave her the address, the approximate start date of the loan, and the last payment amount that had gone through. She typed for a while. Then she told me that the loan was in good standing. No late payments in the last several years. She said that at the current rate, including the most recent payment for December, the mortgage would be fully paid off in exactly 6 more months. 6 months. The same phrase I had heard Rebecca toss around so casually by the dining room. The same timeline my dad had apparently discussed with her and Aunt Marlene. While planning how to use my money for a kitchen remodel, I thanked the woman on the phone, trying to keep my voice level, and hung up. For a moment, I just sat there. The only sound in the little guest house was the soft hum of the mini fridge and the faraway echo of a train passing somewhere in the city. My mind lined up what I had learned in a neat little row. 4 years of payments from me. My dad's own income, a mortgage on track to be finished in 6 months, and a plan, discussed openly at the table, to keep taking my money after that. This was not an accident. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a con, a long game built on my loyalty and their silence. My phone buzzed in my hand again. For a second, I thought it might be my friend Fiona checking in, or maybe one of my cousins asking where I had gone, but it was neither of those. It was my dad. The text was short, no greeting, no apology, just a command dressed up as concern. He told me to delete that video. He said I was taking it the wrong way. He said I should not overthink family jokes. Looking at those words on the screen, my fingers finally stopped shaking completely. Every doubt I had left drained away. Whatever came next, I knew one thing. I was done being the only one in this family who paid the price for everybody else's choices. Sleep did not really come that night. I remember lying on that unfamiliar mattress in the Nashville guest house, staring at the ceiling while the little fake Christmas tree in the corner glowed soft and steady. My phone sat face down on the nightstand. I could feel it there, like a heartbeat, full of numbers and proof and ugly truth. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my dad's voice again, laughing in that video, calling me something I would never forget. At some point, long after the neighborhood had gone quiet, a different kind of thought slipped in between the anger and the hurt. It was not about what they had already taken from me. It was about what else they might have their hands in. My dad was many things, but subtle was not one of them. If he had no problem lying to me, the daughter who had kept his life afloat for years, what were the odds he had told the whole truth to anyone else? I sat up, the room dim and blurry. I reached for my phone and opened my email. Years of messages sat there, stacked one on top of another, like layers of sediment. I scrolled back, farther and farther, until I hit a string of emails from nearly 2020. Back then, my dad had sent me his tax documents so I could help him file online. He had never liked dealing with numbers and forms, and I had always been the one to step in and straighten things out. At the time, I thought I was just being a good daughter. Now those old files felt like a window. I tapped open one of the PDFs. The numbers did not lie. On his return for 2020, there was a section marked as Other, Income, and another section that showed non-taxable assistance. It was not labeled clearly, but there were small notes in the margins in his messy handwriting, things like church help and benevolence. I rubbed my temple and opened the return from 2021. There it was again. Similar entries. I remembered asking him about it back then. He had brushed it off, said something about a few small donations from the church when times were tight. I had believed him. Why would a man who was receiving regular help from his own daughter also ask for money from his church? Now, in the quiet of that guest house, the idea made my stomach twist. I closed the file and stared at the email thread. There it was. One line from him that I had forgotten until that moment. He had thanked me not just for doing the taxes, but for making sure everything looked right for that hardship grant. I remembered reading it and assuming he meant some kind of utility program. I had not asked more. I set the phone down and paced the small room, my sock feet whispering against the hardwood. Nashville in winter has its own kind of silence at night, especially away from the main roads. You can almost hear the city breathing. I thought about the church I had grown up in, Grace Point, the white building with the red brick foundation just off the main road. I thought about the potlucks, the Christmas play, the way people had brought casseroles when my mom died. Those people were not rich. They were teachers and mechanics, nurses and retirees, people who dug into their own pockets when someone in the congregation was in trouble. If my dad had taken from them while I was breaking my back to keep his house, I needed to know. By morning, my decision had settled in like a stone. I showered, pulled on clean jeans and a sweater, tied my hair back, and got in my car. The sky was gray and low, clouds hanging heavy over Nashville. The streets were mostly empty. Christmas morning had passed, and it was that quiet lull when people stayed, inside in pajamas, eating leftovers and watching movies. Grace Point sat at the corner of a wide intersection lined with bare trees. The building looked smaller than I remembered from childhood. I parked near the bath under a tree that had already dropped most of its leaves. Raindrops started to spit on the windshield, light and hesitant. I sat there for a second, engine off, hands on the steering wheel, feeling like a kid again. I had not been a regular at that church in years. Life in Knoxville kept me busy. If I was honest, putting 3 hours between me and this building had been a relief. Still, I got out and walked up the steps to the glass doors. Inside, the lobby was lit but quiet. A tree with white lights stood near the entrance. Someone had arranged poinsettias along the wall. I could hear faint sounds from down the hallway. Maybe someone in an office. As I walked in, I smelled that familiar mix of coffee, cleaning products, and old hymnals. A woman from the front office appeared from behind a desk, her expression friendly but curious. I gave her my name and told her I had grown up there, that my dad was Harold Carter, and that I was hoping to speak with Pastor Collins if he had a moment. Her eyes softened when she recognized the name. She said she would check if he was free. I waited in a chair by the wall, staring at the old bulletin board covered in flyers. Food drives, support groups, announcements about the senior ministry, all the ways people here tried to take care of each other. After a few minutes, Pastor Collins came out of the hallway, carrying a folder. He looked older than I remembered, more lines around his eyes, but his voice was the same gentle baritone I had heard my whole childhood. He shook my hand and asked how I had been. I gave him the short version. I work in Knoxville, still single, still trying to keep my head above water like everybody else. He invited me into his small office. Bookshelves lined the walls. A framed photo of a church retreat hung behind his desk. He sat down and folded his hands, giving me his full attention in that way good pastors do. I told him I had some questions about my dad, about financial assistance he might have received in recent years. I did not go into detail about the video or the mortgage yet. I simply said that I had been helping with some of my dad's bills and had noticed entries on his tax returns that looked like church aid. For a moment, Pastor Collins just looked at me, not suspicious, not defensive, just measuring. Then he opened his folder and flipped through a few pages. He said yes, the church did have a hardship fund for seniors. Yes, my dad had applied a few years back. Yes, he had received support. I asked how long that had gone on. I made myself keep my tone even, like I was asking about the weather. Inside, my heart was pounding. He told me that from 2020 through 2023, the church had given my dad a total of $53,000. He said it in that calm, pastoral voice, but the number hit me like a physical blow. $53,000. During the same time, I had been wiring him $2,200 every single month. I did the math in my head without meaning to. 4 years of my payments, plus that amount from the church, plus his Social Security. There was no universe where he should have been on the edge of losing his house all that time. No justification for the panic he had used to pull me in. All at once, the room felt smaller. The air is thicker. I swallowed hard and asked if he was sure about those numbers. He nodded and turned the papers toward me so I could see. It was my dad's name. The dates, the amounts, all neat and official. My hands felt cold, even though the office was warm. I asked if the church knew that he had a daughter who was also helping him. I asked if he had mentioned me in his applications. Pastor Collins's mouth tightened just a little. He said that my dad had told them he was alone, that he had very limited family support, that his children were struggling financially and could not help. He said the committee had voted to approve his request because they did not want a longtime member to lose his home. There was a beat of silence where I could hear nothing but the faint buzz of the overhead light. He went on and said that a few people had privately wondered how my dad managed his bills when they saw him eating out often or talking about new fishing gear. He said there had been a handful of quiet concerns, but no one had any proof that he was misrepresenting his situation, and the church had chosen to err on the side of grace. We suspected something was not entirely right, he said, but we did not have evidence. We trusted what he told us. Something in his eyes told me he was watching my reaction closely now. I realized my hands were clenched together so tightly my knuckles were white. I forced them to relax. In that moment, sitting in the church that had helped raise me, I understood the full scope of what my dad had done. He had not just used me, he had used them too. He had taken from people who brought crock pots to funeral receptions and packed food boxes for the holidays. People who lived on fixed incomes and still reached into their pockets when someone was in trouble. He had stood in front of them, probably with that same wounded tone he had used on the phone with me, and told them he had no one. I thanked Pastor Collins for being honest with me. I told him I needed some time to process everything. He said that if I ever wanted to talk more, his door was open. As I left his office, I could feel his gaze on my back, heavy with worry. Outside, the rain had picked up. It was not a dramatic storm, just that steady Tennessee drizzle that seeps into your clothes if you stay out too long. I walked down the steps of the church without hurrying, letting the drops collect in my hair and on my cheeks. The sky was a flat, dull gray. The parking lot was slick and empty, except for my car and one other. By the time I slid into the driver's seat, my sweater was damp and my jeans clung to my knees. I just sat there, listening to the soft patter of rain on the windshield, feeling he had taken the church's money. He had taken our grief after my mom died and turned it into leverage. I did not know yet what I was going to do about it, but I knew. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I picked it up, expecting another useless promotional email. Instead, I saw a message from a number I recognized but had not seen in a while. It was from Martha, the elderly neighbor who had lived next door to my parents for as long as I could remember. She said she had heard I was in town. She said there was something I needed to know about my mom and my dad. I parked in front of Martha's small brick house a little after noon, the rain easing into a mist that clung to the windshield like a breath on a mirror. Her house sat just 2 doors down from my dad's place, a pale yellow ranch with a porch swing that had not moved in years. I remembered sitting on that swing when I was a kid, my legs too short to reach the ground, listening to her stories about Nashville, back when the orchards still stood, where the shopping centers sit now. She opened the front door before I even knocked. Her white hair was pinned up the way it always had been, and she wore a soft gray sweater that hung a little too big on her thin shoulders. She hugged me tightly, the kind of hug that makes you feel seen in a way words cannot. We sat at her kitchen table with 2 mugs of weak tea. The house smelled like biscuits and old wood. For a moment, she just looked at me, her eyes gentle and tired. She said that she had wanted to talk to me for a long time, but did not know if it was her place. Then she told me about the years before my mom died, the years I had tried so hard to forget. Martha said she remembered nights when my mom would come to her porch with red eyes, saying she needed a little air. She would sit in the swing and rock slowly while Martha fetched tissues. She said my dad had a temper then, not the sharp, quiet control he used on me, but something louder, more brutal. She said she had heard shouting through the walls too many times to count. Once, in 2011, Martha had called the police because the noise sounded wrong, like something breaking. 2 officers showed up. My mom had come outside, with her hair messy and her voice shaking. She told them nothing was wrong. She said she had tripped on a step. The officers asked if she was sure. She nodded until they left. I sat very still while Martha talked. My throat felt tight, as if someone had tied a string around it. I had always known my mom carried sadness, the kind that sits behind the eyes, like a shadow. But I had never let myself imagine the shape of it. I had never let myself see that her exhaustion did not come from illness alone. Martin placed her hand on mine and said softly that my mom had tried so hard to keep the peace. She said my mom used to whisper she did not want her kids growing up scared. She said the last year of her life, she seemed tired in a way that had nothing to do with hospitals. I think that was the moment something inside me cracked open wide and clean. Not the sharp break I felt when watching the video, but a deeper one. A quiet grief for the woman who had made everything soft before the world hardened around us. When I left Martha's house, the mist had turned into a steady drizzle again. I drove back to Knoxville with a hollow feeling behind my ribs, like someone had scooped something out of me and forgot to put anything back. By the time I got home, my apartment felt foreign. I hung up my coat, fed myself a quick dinner I barely tasted, and tried to pull myself together enough for work the next morning. I kept hearing my mom's voice in my memory, gentle and tired, and the echo of my dad's voice from that video layered over it like poisoned paint. I tried to sleep. I couldn't. The next day at work in the logistics office, the building hummed with its usual Monday rhythm. Phones ringing, printers clicking, the smell of burnt coffee drifting through the air. I forced myself to focus on my monitor, responding to customer emails and updating schedules. I kept my phone face down, pretending the world outside my job did not exist. Around 10 in the morning, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it and felt a stab in my stomach. It was Dylan. He asked where I was. I did not respond. A moment later, he called. I let it ring. Then he called again. When I finally picked up, his voice came in harsh and low. Everyone at the dinner said you were acting strange. You better calm down before you do something stupid. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. He was not done. He said Dad was mad, Rebecca was worried, and the whole family had decided I was overreacting. He said if I stirred up drama, I would regret it. His tone was the kind that comes right before a shove. I hung up on him. For a few minutes, I sat stiff at my desk, trying to breathe. I kept telling myself he would settle down. He always did. I was wrong. Around lunchtime, I went downstairs to grab a soda from the break room. When I stepped into the lobby, I heard shouting through the glass doors. A loud, furious voice. A voice I knew. I froze. Dylan stood outside the building, yelling my name, pounding on the glass like he owned the place. His face was red, his teeth clenched, his hair messy as if he had driven here in a rush. He shouted that I was tearing the family apart, that I had no right to go digging around, that I needed to stop whatever I was doing. People were staring. Receptionists stepped back. A delivery driver halted mid-step. Before I could react, HR manager Linda hurried toward him with 2 security guards. She was a calm woman in her 50s, with a way of speaking that usually soothed people. Not today. She asked Dylan to leave the premises. He refused. He tried to push through the door. Security blocked him. Someone in the lobby whispered, "Should we call the police?" Linda looked shaken. She told me to stay behind the desk. Security pushed Dylan back again, and after a tense minute, he finally staggered toward the parking lot, shouting that he was not done with this. The moment he drove away, my legs gave out for a second. I sank onto the chair by the wall, my breath shaky and tight. People were still staring. Someone asked if I needed water. Someone else asked if he was my husband. I shook my head. I could not speak. Back upstairs, I sat at my desk, unable to type a single word. My nerves were shot. I felt exposed, unsafe, small again, the way I felt as a child whenever my dad raised his voice. Then a hand gently touched the edge of my desk. It was Daniel, one of the senior coordinators who had worked with me for years. A quiet man with kind eyes who rarely spoke unless he had something important to say. He sat in the chair beside me and lowered his voice. He said he heard what happened. He asked if I was all right. Before I could give him the polite lie, my eyes filled and I shook my head. I told him a little. Not everything, but enough that he understood something serious was happening. He asked if he could see the video. I hesitated, then handed him my phone. He watched it once, his face growing darker with each word. When it ended, he exhaled slowly. He asked if I had backed it up anywhere. I told him no, that my dad had already asked me to delete it. At that, Daniel stood up, telling me to give him a minute. He came back with a small USB drive and his laptop. He said he used to work with digital files in his last job and knew how to pull the video directly from the internal storage, even if someone tried to delete it later. I watched him connect the phone, his hands steady, his expression focused. A few minutes later, he looked at me with a seriousness I had never seen from him. He said that the video was safe now, copied in several formats. He said I needed to keep it somewhere my family could never reach. Then he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Maddie, something is wrong. Someone is trying to cover their tracks." My skin prickled, but I could not respond. I could barely breathe. He closed his laptop and placed the USB drive in my hand. He said quietly that he did not think I was safe. And that is when I knew the truth was bigger than I imagined. Daniel said he did not think I was safe, and the way he said it settled deep in my bones. The rest of that workday passed in a blur. I answered emails on autopilot, double-checked shipping schedules 3 times because my mind kept slipping. Back to Nashville. Back to that church office. Back to my dad's voice in that video. By the time I drove home to my small apartment in Knoxville, I felt wrung out and brittle, like one sharp word would make me crack. I heated a can of soup, stared at it until it went cold, then poured it down the sink. The quiet in my apartment felt different now. It had always been my refuge before, a place where I could breathe. Tonight, it felt like a waiting room before something big and unknown. My phone buzzed on the counter. For a second, I flinched, thinking it might be Dylan again. Instead, I saw a name I had not expected. Emily, my cousin, Marlene's girl, the one who, as a kid, always seemed to shrink into herself whenever my dad was around. The one I had seen at holidays, hovering near the edges, eyes flicking toward him with something that had never looked like love. Her message was short. She asked if I was back in Knoxville. She asked if we could meet for coffee the next day. She said there were things she needed to tell me about my dad, and that could not wait. I stared at her words for a long moment, my heart beating faster again. Then I typed back that I was in town, that I could meet her at a cafe downtown around 10 in the morning. She replied almost immediately that she would be there. I did not sleep much that night either. The next morning was cold and bright, the kind of clear winter day that makes Knoxville's hills look sharper against the sky. I drove to a little cafe just off Gay Street, the one with brick walls and mismatched chairs where college kids and office workers mixed together over strong coffee and stale muffins. I got there early and chose a table near the back, facing the door. Emily arrived right on time. She had grown into herself since the last time I had really looked at her. 29 now. Dark hair pulled into a loose knot, gray coat buttoned tight, a crossbody bag slung over her shoulder, but she still carried that same wary tension in her shoulders, like she was always braced for a shout. She spotted me, hesitated for a heartbeat, then walked over. We hugged awkwardly. 2 relatives who shared blood, but not much history. Her hands were cold. We ordered coffee. She wrapped both hands around her cup like she needed its warmth to stay rooted. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The noise of the cafe swelled and shrank around us, clinking silverware and low chatter blending into a kind of cover. Finally, she lifted her eyes to mine. There was fear in them, but also a kind of tired determination. She said she was sorry she had not reached out sooner. She said she had seen some of the messages flying through the family group, chat after Christmas, that she had heard pieces of what had happened with the video, and that when she read the words about me being the family cash cow, something inside her snapped. I asked her softly what she meant. She looked down at her coffee, and her voice dropped so low I had to lean in to hear. She told me that in the summer of 2008, when she was 12, she had stayed at my parents' house for a few days. Marlene had been dealing with a surgery and needed help, and my mom had offered to watch Emily. Back then, I was in middle school, in and out of the house with friends and summer activities. I remembered Emily being there, sleep in the small guest room at the end of the hall. I remembered thinking she was quiet for a kid her age. Emily said that at first it was normal. Board games, cartoons. My mom makes pancakes. But then one night, my mom had to run to the store, and I was at a friend's house. That left Emily alone in the house with my dad. Her fingers tightened around the coffee cup. She stared at the table as she spoke. She said he had come into the guest room after dark and sat on the edge of the bed. He had asked her how she was sleeping, had told her she was growing up so fast, and had touched her leg under the blanket in a way that made her stomach twist. When she froze, he laughed softly and told her not to make such a big deal out of things. She said she had pushed his hand away and curled up tight, and that after a moment he had gotten up and left, muttering something about not being appreciated. She had lain there awake the rest of the night, heart pounding, too frightened to move. The next day my mom came back from the store, and everything went on like nothing had happened. Emily said she had not known how to tell anyone. She had only been 12. She had barely understood what she was feeling, only that it felt wrong. On the third night, it happened again. He came in, smelling like beer, and sat on her bed. This time, his hand traveled higher. She choked on a sob as she told me this part. My own stomach clenched. She said she had screamed, loud, louder than she thought she could. The sound had startled him. He jerked back. My mom had come running down the hall, asking what was going on. Emily had been sobbing, unable to get words out. My dad had stood by the door, face dark, saying she had a nightmare, that she was confused. Emily said my mom had taken her into the bathroom, closed the door, and tried to soothe her. She had asked what happened. Emily had tried to explain, stumbling over words she barely knew. My mom's face had gone white. She had said she believed her. Then, the next day, Marlene had shown up early. My mom had called her and asked her to come get Emily. There had been a hushed conversation in the kitchen, raised voices. My dad said he would never do something like that. Marlene cried. My mom said she believed the girl. Then, the arguing stopped. The house went quiet. Marlene had pulled Emily aside in the driveway before they left. She had told her that sometimes adults misunderstand things, that talking about this could ruin the whole family, that no one would believe her anyway. She had said they needed to move on. She had asked Emily to never bring it up again. So she never did. As she finished, Emily swiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, embarrassed. The coffee in front of her sat forgotten. I felt like the world had narrowed to just this table, this story, this moment. I heard my own voice asking her how she had lived with that all these years. She shrugged a small, tired shrug. She said she had done what a lot of girls do. Pushed it down, blamed herself, kept away from my dad as much as she could, avoided me during holidays because she was afraid that if she got close to me, he would notice and find a way to shut her up. That last part hit me harder than I expected. I thought back over all the gatherings where I had seen her across the room and assumed she was shy, uninterested, stuck in her own world. I had never once wondered if she was scared. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn notebook. The cover was faded blue with a little flower pattern. She opened it carefully to a page marked with a bent corner. The paper was yellowed a bit, the ink slightly smudged with age. She turned the notebook so I could see. On that page, in the shaky handwriting of a 12-year-old, she had written about that night in 2008. She had written about the room, about my dad sitting on her bed, about being scared and screaming. She had drawn a little box around the date at the top of the page. There were tear stains in one corner. I touched the edge of the paper with my fingertips, gently, as if it might crumble. My throat ached. My chest felt heavy. Any leftover image of my dad as just a flawed man, just a struggling widower who had made bad decisions, died at that moment. The man who had taken my money and lied to the church had also sat on the edge. I could not excuse any of it anymore. I asked Emily why she was telling me now, after all this time. She said that when she saw the way he spoke about me in that video, laughing about how he was using me, something in her snapped. She realized he had been hurting people for years and getting away with it. Every time. She said she was tired of being part of his silence. She took a deep breath and added that she was scared. Scared of what he would do if he found out she had talked. Scared of how her mom would react. But she was more scared of what would happen if no one ever held him accountable. We sat there in that cafe with Christmas music playing softly overhead and people passing by the windows, living their regular lives while the ground shifted under my feet. I thanked her for trusting me. I told her I believed her. That part did not require effort. It felt as certain as knowing the sky was blue. We agreed that for now, she would keep the original journal, but that she would take photos of the pages and send them to me so there would be a record somewhere else. something that could not be ripped up in anger or misplaced in a move. After she left, I stayed at the table for a long time, staring at my cooling coffee. I thought about my mom, about the lines of worry I remembered around her mouth. I thought about Martha calling the police that time and my mom sending them away. I thought about all the ways my dad had taught us to keep quiet, and I knew that quiet had done nothing but protect him. The video of the Christmas dinner, the bank records, the confirmation from the church about the hardship fund money. Now Emily's journal. The pieces were piling up. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, realizing you are either going to step back and pretend you never saw the drop, or you are going to climb down and show the world what is underneath. I took out my phone and opened a new search. I typed in the name of a lawyer in Knoxville that one of my coworkers had mentioned before, a woman named Grace Whitman, who handled civil cases and was known for not backing down when things got ugly. Looking at her office address on the screen, I felt something settle in my chest. Not peace, not yet. Resolve. It was time to put everything I had into the hands of someone who knew how to use it. Grace spread every document across her desk, her fingers moving slowly at first, then faster, as she pieced my life together like a puzzle that never should have existed in the first place. The small meeting room in her office building smelled faintly of old paper and peppermint from the candy dish near the printer. I sat there with my hands clasped tight, trying to keep them from shaking. The rain tapped against the windows, a soft rhythm that somehow made the air feel tenser. She examined the Christmas video again, the one of my dad laughing while calling me the family's cash cow. She read through Emily's page from the 2008 journal, her expression hardening as she took in each line. She looked over my banking records, showing every monthly mortgage payment of $2,200. Then she read the financial statements from Grace Point Church, confirming the $53,000 he received over the past few years. Grace finally set everything down and leaned back in her chair. She was a woman in her early 50s, sharp as a blade, but warm in a way that made you want to tell her things. "You know you are," had not told anyone else. Her voice came out steady and low. "Addie, he cannot sue you. He has no legal ground to stand on." I watched her fold her hands, waiting for the part that scared me more. She lifted her eyes to me. "But you, Maddie, you can file civil action, and it would be strong." I stared at the evidence laid out, all the pieces of betrayal forming something heavy and undeniable. I had never gone after anyone legally. I had spent my whole life trying to keep the peace, but peace had not protected me. It had trapped me. Grace told me I had options: financial fraud, emotional exploitation, misappropriation of funds, possible charges linked to Emily's case, depending on statute limitations and corroboration. She said the church's records alone were damning. I asked her what would happen next. She explained that Grace Point already had internal meetings underway because of what I had turned in. She said churches take misuse of hardship funds very seriously, especially in Tennessee, where community reputation carried weight. Right on cue, my phone buzzed on the table. It was an email notification from Pastor Collins. I opened it while Grace watched. The church had officially convened their board. The message said they had reviewed all evidence and found substantial cause to demand repayment of the full $53,000. They were also filing a formal complaint at the King County precinct. My heart thudded in my chest like someone knocking from the inside. Grace nodded as if she expected this. She said it would move fast because the church did not want bad press. They wanted to appear swift and fair and resolute. She told me this was good for my case, but I could not feel good. I felt stunned, hollow, small again, just like when Dad yelled when I was a kid and my mom shrank into the background with tired eyes. Before I could say anything, my phone buzzed again, a text from Dad. I read it silently. "You did this. I lost the house and the church because of you." I swallowed. Another came. "You are nothing but trouble. Everything falling apart is on you." Grace read my face and asked if I wanted to show her. I handed her the phone. She shook her head slowly. "This is manipulation, Maddie. Do not let it take root." But the words had already curled under my skin like cold fingers. Then another message arrived. this time from Dylan. If Dad does something stupid because of you, that guilt is yours. Think about that. I set the phone down as if it had burned me. My pulse climbed too fast to control. Grace told me not to respond and to forward everything to her so she could. Keep it documented. She stood and placed a hand gently on my shoulder, steadying me. She said Dad and Dylan were lashing out because they were losing control. She said people like them only know how to fight dirty when they feel cornered. I nodded, but the fear lingered like smoke. Grace gathered everything into a folder and said she would begin drafting the paperwork to protect me if they escalated. Then she walked me through safety steps, who to contact if Dylan showed up again, and what to do if Dad tried anything unpredictable. I stepped out of her office after an hour, unsteady but determined. The hallway smelled like fresh coffee and printer ink. My head felt too full, buzzing with every piece of the truth I wished I did not know. When I reached the parking lot, the clouds had thickened into a low, gray ceiling stretching over Nashville. I leaned against my car for a moment, staring at the ripples gathering in small puddles on the pavement. I told myself to breathe. I drove back toward the guest house where I had been staying. The road wound through old neighborhood, past tall oak trees still dripping from the morning rain. For a moment, I tried to convince myself that things could calm down, that maybe this storm would pass. But that hope died quickly when my phone rang again. An unknown number showed up on the screen. I hesitated before answering, bracing myself. A firm male voice came through. "Maddie Carter, this is Detective Hughes from the King County Police Department." My grip on the steering wheel tightened. He said he had received a report from Grace Point Church, along with material I had provided through Pastor Collins. He said the board had mentioned an incident from 2008 involving my cousin Emily. He said they were opening an investigation. Detective Hughes paused before telling me they needed to schedule a formal interview with me as soon as possible. My mouth went dry. My pulse kicked up. I asked him if this was serious. He said it was very serious. He asked if I could come downtown tomorrow morning, and then he added something that hit me harder than everything else that day. "We believe your father may be involved in more than financial misconduct. We need to talk." I ended the call with my breath trembling in my throat. Everything around me suddenly felt too quiet, too sharp, too real. I sat alone in my parked car with the rain starting again, drops hitting the windshield like soft taps. Detective Hughes needed to meet. The police were involved. Emily's pain was no longer a secret, and the truth I thought I understood was about to go even deeper. The next morning, I sat in a small interview room at the police station. Fingers laced together so tightly my knuckles ached. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, making everything look a little too sharp, a little too exposed. Detective Hughes sat across from me with a legal pad and a small recorder on the table, his expression steady and professional in a way that both calmed me and scared me. He explained the process, that our conversation would be recorded, that I could stop at any time, that the goal was to get a clear picture of what had happened. I nodded, my throat dry, and started talking. I told him about the Christmas video, about my dad sitting at the table laughing, while he called me the family cash cow. I told him about the mortgage payments, $2,200 every month for 4 years. I told him about the email from Grace Point that showed $53,000 in hardship funds going to my dad from 2020 through 2023. Then I told him about Emily. I described the coffee shop in Knoxville, the look on her face as she told me about that summer in 2008, when she was 12, and stayed with us for a few days. I told him what she remembered. My dad coming into the guest room at night, sitting on her bed, touching her. I told him about the scream, about my mom running down the hallway, about the fight in the kitchen between my mom and Aunt Marlene, about the way it had all been smoothed over in the morning. I slid the printed copy of the journal page across the table. He read it slowly, eyes moving line by line. He did not react big, but his jaw tightened just enough for me to notice. He asked careful questions. When did I first learn about it? Did I remember my mom and Marlene arguing that week? Had I ever seen my dad behave inappropriately around other girls? I answered as honestly as I could. Sometimes I had to stop and breathe, the words catching at the back of my throat. When we finally finished, my head felt light and heavy at the same time. He switched off the recorder and thanked me for being candid. He said they would be speaking to Emily directly, and to others who might corroborate parts of the story, including Martha, and possibly neighbors and church leaders. He said that the financial side and the possible abuse were separate, but connected, because they painted a larger picture of my dad's patterns. As I walked out of the station into the pale winter light, I felt like I had left pieces of myself on that table. Important pieces, painful pieces, but ones that needed to be examined under brighter light than I could provide, alone. Back in Knoxville a few days later, I kept waking up with my heart pounding, as if I had been running in my sleep. The past and the present tangled together until I could not tell which ache belonged to which wound. At some point, I realized I was not going to be able to carry all of this alone anymore. On a Wednesday afternoon, I sat in a soft beige chair in a therapist's office near downtown. The woman sitting across from me was in her early 60s, with kind eyes and a cardigan that looked like it had seen 100 similar stories. Her name was Dr. Reynolds, and she spoke in a calm, gentle tone that did not push, but did not let me hide either. The first session, I talked in circles about my mom dying in 2012, about picking up the pieces of the house, while my dad grew colder and more controlling, about standing in kitchens and living rooms and always feeling like a shadow next to Rebecca's glow and Dylan's noise, about telling myself that being useful meant I was loved. Eventually, I told her about the 4 years of mortgage payments, about how guilty I felt for not seeing it sooner, for letting it go on so long, for not questioning more. She stopped me there and asked who had actually done the lying, who had built the story I believed. She said that kids who grow up in chaos often mistake endurance for love, that my body had learned to carry more than it should have because I thought. That was the price of belonging. Hearing it laid out like that made my chest ache, but it also made something loosen. Just a little. While I was trying to untangle my history in that quiet office, my family was waging their own war in a place a lot louder. It started with a notification on my phone when I was sitting on my couch one evening. A throw blanket pulled up around my shoulders. Rebecca had posted something on Facebook, and mutual friends kept reacting to it. She had written one of those long public posts that look like concern on the surface, but bleed poison underneath. She said that she was worried about her little sister. She said that grief had twisted me, that I had become paranoid and was making up stories about our dad, who had only ever done his best. She did not name me outright, but she did not have to. Half the family knew exactly who she was talking about. She implied that I was unwell, that I was imagining things, that I had misinterpreted jokes, that I was trying to destroy a good man's reputation because I could not handle my own issues. Reading it, I felt heat rise from my chest to my face. Friends from high school commented saying things like, "Always here for you. Rebecca, family is hard." A few relatives chimed in with little hearts and prayers. No one tagged, but I could feel my name hanging in the spaces between their sentences. For a second, I almost replied. I wanted to type until my fingers cramped, to paste the video link, to explain the numbers, to post the church's letter and Emily's journal page. Then I heard Grace's voice in my head, telling me to keep my powder dry, that social media fights do not win legal battles. So I took a screenshot and sent it to her instead. Then I closed the app and set my phone face down, breathing hard. The world did not stop for my family drama. Bills still came. Work still needed me on time. Life moved on and dragged me with it. A week later, I got a certified letter from Grace Point Church. My hands shook a little as I opened it at my kitchen counter, the afternoon light slanting across the laminate. The letter was formal and spare, full of careful phrases and firm deadlines. The church board had concluded their internal investigation. They had determined that my dad had received $53,000 in CAMAS, hardship funds, under false pretenses. They were giving him 60 days to begin repayment and agree to a structured plan for the full amount. If he failed to respond or cooperate, they would recommend that the matter be turned over fully to the district attorney. I imagined him reading that letter at his kitchen table in Nashville, the same table where he had laughed over that Christmas video. I wondered if he still thought it was funny. Then, as if the universe wanted to underline the point, another envelope arrived 2 days later, this time from the bank that held his mortgage. Foreclosure proceedings would begin in 30 days if the loan did not remain in good standing. It was standard language, the kind that gets sent to thousands of people every year. But to me, it felt like a countdown clock, starting somewhere I could not see. I called Grace and told her. She said quietly that this was the natural consequence of years of avoidance and deception. She reminded me that my stepping back from the payments had not created the problem. It had only revealed it. That night, I sat alone at my small kitchen table, the only light in the apartment coming from the soft yellow lamp in the corner. The 2 letters lay in front of me. One from Grace Point, demanding full repayment of the $53,000, and one from the bank, stating foreclosure would officially begin in 30 days. I stared at them for a long time, as if the paper might eventually explain how everything had spiraled this far. But no matter how long I looked, the truth stayed simple and cold. I had stepped back, and the moment I stopped carrying the weight for him, the structure he built on, lies, collapsed on its own. Now everyone could see what I had been holding up. I folded both letters carefully and slipped them into a drawer. A chill went through me. Not the kind that touches your skin, but the deeper kind that settles in your chest when something you believed in breaks for good. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes, taking a long breath, trying to keep myself from sinking into old patterns of guilt I was slowly learning did not belong to me. Outside my window, Knoxville eased into the night. A few cars rolled by on the street below, their headlights drifting across my walls. And in that quiet stillness, a single realization settled over me with surprising clarity. The truth was out now. It could not be hidden anymore. I stood, turned off the light, and let the apartment fall into darkness, knowing the next few days would bring even more than I had prepared for. I stared at my dad's email for a long time, the words pulling at an old part of me I thought I had outgrown. For years, he had trained me to feel responsible for the roof over his head, the bills on his table, the peace in his house. But now, reading the way he begged as if I was still that girl scrambling to earn his affection, I felt something shift inside me. I understood, finally, that my silence had never protected anyone. It had only made more room for him to hurt people. So I opened a new message window on my laptop. The glow of the screen lit up my apartment in a cold blue, the only light in the room. My hands trembled a little, but they were steady enough to click through every folder Grace had helped me organize. I attached the Christmas video where my dad laughed about me being their cash cow. I attached the bank statements showing every $2,200 payment I had made. I attached the confirmation from Grace Point about the $53,000 hardship fund. I attached Emily's scanned journal page from 2008. I attached my statement to Detective Hughes. Then I wrote a short note. This is what has been happening. These are the facts. I am tired of protecting someone who never protected any of us. I typed every email address of every aunt, uncle, cousin, and second cousin I could find. Family from Nashville, Knoxville, Memphis, Atlanta, relative I had not seen since Mom's funeral. People who used to send Christmas cards, people who had slowly pulled away as the years went on. I hovered over the send button once, took a breath, and clicked. The email whooshed out of my inbox, and for a moment I sat there frozen, waiting for the world to tilt. It did. Within minutes, replies flooded in. Some wrote short messages, stunned or confused. Some wrote long ones, disbelieving or angry. A few called me brave. Others accused me of betrayal. One uncle replied saying I should have come to him first. One cousin said none of this sounded like the Harold she knew. Another said she had always felt something off around him. Then came Rebecca's reply. A wall of words in all caps. She said I was destroying the family. She said I had twisted everything. She said I had broken Dad's heart. She even wrote that I had manipulated Emily, that I had taken advantage of her vulnerability. I deleted it without finishing. I knew exactly who she was protecting. Dylan's email arrived next. It was shorter. One sentence. You are dead to us. I sat back and let the noise roll over me, a storm I had unleashed with a single decision. My laptop kept chiming until I finally shut it closed. By early evening, someone began knocking at my apartment door. Hard. Aggressive. The sound made my pulse spike instantly. I looked through the peephole. Rebecca stood on the landing in her tan coat, face red with fury. Dylan was behind her, pacing like he was warming up for a fight. They both looked like they had driven straight from Nashville without thinking, twice. Rebecca banged again, the noise vibrating through my hallway. "We need to talk." "Maddie, open this door. We are not leaving until you do." I stepped back from the door, my heart hammering. Every instinct I had learned in childhood rushed back. Stay quiet, stay small, stay agreeable. But I did none of those things. I said through the door that I was not opening it, that they needed to leave. My voice shook, but I got the words out. Dylan shouted that I was a coward. He kicked the bottom of the door hard enough to rattle it in the frame. I reached for my phone with shaking hands and texted my friend Fiona, who lived nearby. I also texted Daniel and told him what was happening. Both said they were on their way. Rebecca kept pounding on the door, shouting about how the entire family was sick of my lies. I backed into the kitchen and tried to breathe, reminding myself that I was safe, that there was a lock between us. The sound of footsteps thundered up the stairs a few minutes later. For a second, I panicked that Dylan had gone to get something from the car. But then I heard Fiona's voice, firm and furious, telling them to back away from my apartment before she called the police. Daniel was right behind her, his presence steady and grounding. He told them they needed to leave immediately, or he would file a trespassing report. For a moment, tension crackling in the air like static. Finally, Rebecca pulled Dylan back, muttering that they were not done, that I would regret this. They stomped down the stairs, and the building quieted again. When they were gone, Fiona wrapped her arms around me in a tight hug, while Daniel checked that the WT hallway was clear. I sank into the hug, my whole body trembling from adrenaline. Daniel told me to keep the door locked and handed me a new portable camera for my entryway, something he had ordered when he worried things might escalate. They stayed with me for a while. We sat at my kitchen table while the heater kicked on and off, filled the small apartment with a steady hum. They talked about work, movies, anything to keep the air from collapsing under the weight of everything happening. After they left, I sat there alone again, the quiet settling like dust. The next morning, I woke to an email from Grace Point Church. They informed me they had officially filed their full report with King County Police. They thanked me for bringing the matter to their attention. They said they were cooperating fully. The same afternoon, while I was at my desk at work, trying to concentrate on routing schedules, I received another envelope from the mortgage company. My dad's foreclosure date had been finalized. It would happen the following week. There was nothing more I could do. I held the letter in my hands for a long time, feeling strangely steady. Not relieved, not triumphant, just steady, like a ship finally finding its balance on rough water. That evening, as the winter sun dipped low behind the Knoxville skyline, I returned home and checked my mailbox. A single envelope sat inside, with my name written in handwriting I recognized instantly. My dad's handwriting. I carried it upstairs slowly, sat on the couch. I turned it over in my hands. The paper felt soft from being handled too much, maybe folded and unfolded again. Inside was a letter. He had written pages, his words slanted and uneven. He wrote that he knew he had made mistakes, that he was ashamed, that he felt cornered, that he did not know how things had gotten so bad. He wrote that he was losing the house, losing the church, losing the family. He wrote that I was his daughter, and that he was begging me to save him. At the bottom, he wrote he was sorry, but the way he phrased it felt less like an apology and more like a plea for rescue. I read the last line again. He asked me to forgive him and to save his house. For a long time, I just sat there at my kitchen table in Knoxville, the letters spread out in front of me, the ink shaky in places like his hand had not wanted to cooperate. Outside my window, the city was sliding into late afternoon, the sky pale and washed out, the streetlights just starting to blink awake. I could hear distant traffic, someone laughing on the sidewalk below, the normal sounds of regular life. Inside me, nothing felt regular. I took the letter to my next therapy session and read parts of it aloud to Dr. Reynolds. My voice wobbled on the lines where he said he was ashamed and scared, then turned sharp when he hinted that I was the only one who could fix this. She listened quietly and then asked me a simple question. What do you owe him now? I sat with that for a while. It was Grace who suggested meeting him one last time, somewhere public, somewhere neutral. Same that was not the house or the church or my apartment. She said I might need to hear myself say certain things out loud. She said closure did not come in a neat package, but sometimes a clear final conversation helped. So a few days before the foreclosure date, I texted my dad. I told him I could talk in person for a short time. I gave him the address of a big chain grocery store off the highway near Hendersonville. I picked it because the parking lot was always full and the cameras were always on. The drive from Knoxville to Nashville that day felt different from every other trip I had made on that road. No holiday, no birthday, no family event waiting at the end. Just a meeting I both dreaded and needed. When I pulled into the parking lot, the winter sun hung low but bright, reflecting off windshields and turning everything into hard little flashes of light. I spotted him near the far edge of the lot, leaning against his aging sedan. He looked smaller, somehow, his shoulders slumped, his hair gray in a way I had never really noticed, his face drawn and tired. For a second, my heart did what it always did, that old reflex of wanting to run up and fix everything. Then I reminded myself why we were here. I parked a few spaces away and walked over. The gravel crunched under my boots. He watched me approach, his eyes searching my face like he was trying to find the daughter he used to. No. He said he was glad I came. His voice shook on the last word. Up close, I could see dark circles under his eyes, see the way his hands trembled around the pack of cigarettes he was trying not to light. He started talking fast. He said the bank was serious, that the church was pushing for their money, that the family was pulled in all directions. He said if the house went, everything went. Our memories, Mom's garden, the only place that still felt like a home to him. Then he said the part I knew was coming, that I could stop all of it, that with my help, he could catch up, buy enough time to calm the church down, maybe work out a deal. He reminded me how much I make now, how I had always been clever with money. I listened without interrupting, letting every word sit between us in the cold air. When he finally ran out of steam, he looked at me the way he used to look at past due notices. Like I was a problem he could still talk his way around. He said that I could not let him lose everything, that no decent daughter would do that. My hands were cold in my pockets, but my voice came out steady. I told him that I did forgive him, but not in the way he wanted. I said I was choosing to let go of the hope that he would ever be the dad I needed. I was choosing to stop carrying his shame like it was mine. I was doing that for my own heart, not as a gift to him. Then I said I was not going to save him from what he had done. I told him I had already given him 4 years of my life, more than $105,000 of my income, and more emotional energy than I could measure. I reminded him that while I was sending money from Knoxville, he was taking money from Grace Point. While I believed I was saving our family home, he was laughing about me behind my back. I told him calmly that he had chosen every step that led to this parking lot, that it was not my job to build a bridge over a cliff he had jackhammered himself. For a moment, he just stared at me, his mouth slightly open. Then the anger rose. It always did. He said I was cruel, cold, ungrateful. He said he had fed me and clothed me and given me a roof. He said I was just like my mom, weak and dramatic, and always making him the bad guy. Hearing him speak about her like that made something burn hot and clean in my chest. I told him no, I was not like Mom. She had stayed and taken it until it killed her from the inside out. I said I was stronger because I chose to stop. I chose to walk away. He flinched then. Just a little, like the words had finally slipped past his armor. His face twisted, caught between rage and something that almost looked like fear. He said I would regret this. When I was older and alone, I would wish I had kept my family. I told him quietly that I was already less alone than I had ever been when I let people see the truth, that the loneliness I felt as a child in that house had been far worse than any peace I might find now. Cars kept moving past us. Shoppers pushing carts, life going on around this small storm. Someone glanced our way, but quickly looked away again. To anyone else, we were just two people arguing outside a grocery store. To me, it felt like the final scene of a life I was no longer willing to live. I told him I hoped he would one day learn something from all this, that I truly did not wish him harm, but I would not rewrite the ending to make him more comfortable. Then I said goodbye, Not see you later, not talk to you soon, just goodbye. I turned and walked back to my car. He called my name once, then again, but I did not look back. My hand shook a little as I started the engine, but by the time I reached the exit, my breathing had evened out. A week later, the house in Hendersonville went through foreclosure. It felt strange to see the listing vanish from real estate websites and then reappear with a fresh coat of language, as if the bricks and walls and floors had been wiped clean of everything they had held. I did not drive by. I did not need to watch strangers move into the place where so many ghosts still lived. Dad ended up renting a small trailer in a park outside Nashville. Word traveled through the family grapevine. Someone said the place was rough, that the neighbors were loud, that the roof leaked when it rained. Dylan visited him sometimes. Rebecca posted vague messages online about loyalty and betrayal. I stayed out of it. Emily started therapy with a counselor in her town. She texted me after her second session and said it was hard, but she felt like she could finally breathe without waiting for the other shoe to drop. She said telling the truth out loud to someone who believed her felt like standing in sunlight after years of dim rooms. I told her I was proud of her. I meant it with my whole heart. Grace Point announced to the congregation that the hardship fund had been misused and that the person responsible was on a long repayment plan. They did not say his name from the pulpit, but everyone knew. The church set up new safeguards and a committee to oversee future aid. Some people were angry. Some were disappointed. Some quietly reached out to me with messages that said they were sorry and that they had never imagined what I had been carrying. Life in Knoxville kept moving. A few months after everything blew up, my manager called me into his office at the logistics company. He told me he had noticed the way I handled crises, the way I kept projects steady even when things got messy. He offered me a promotion to senior coordinator with a salary that finally reflected the work I had been doing for years. I walked out of that office feeling lighter than I had in a decade. With the raise, I moved out of my old cramped apartment into a place up on a hill with big windows and a view of the city lights at night. I bought a new couch that did not sag, a real dining table instead of the wobbly hand-me-down I had used since college, a plant for the windowsill that I promised myself I would try not to kill. The first night in the new apartment, I stood by the glass and looked out over Knoxville. The lights glittered like scattered coins. It did not erase what had happened, but it felt like a beginning that belonged to me. On a warm Saturday in early spring, Fiona and I drove out toward the mountains and hiked one of the easier trails. The air smelled like damp earth and pine, and the sound. We walked for a while in comfortable silence, our boots scuffing against rocks and roots. Eventually, she asked me if I ever thought about going back, not to the house, but to the family in some way. I thought about the way she must have felt trapped between love and fear. I thought about younger me, trying to earn smiles that never came. I thought about Emily, about the church, about the police reports, and the letters, and the parking lot. I told Fiona that I did think about them, sometimes more than I wanted to, but I did not want to go back to the way things were. I had learned that walking away was not abandonment. Sometimes it was survival. Up on the outlet, I realized I no longer felt like the girl waiting in the hallway for someone to choose her. I felt like a woman who had chosen herself. I know some people hear a story like mine and think it is too harsh. They say blood is thicker. They say you only get one dad. They ask why I could not just keep paying until things calmed down. They do not see that sometimes the greatest kindness you can offer a person is to stop cushioning the fall they built for themselves. If you have ever felt invisible in your own family, if you have ever been used or dismissed, or told you were only valuable when you were giving, I hope my story reminds you that you are allowed to stand up. You are allowed to step away, and you are absolutely allowed to build a life that feels safe and honest and yours. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.